So I just want to get this out there because I listen to so many podcasts that if I don't share my thoughts, I'm going to lose my mind. So this is just my unloading about how I believe I've basically come around on basically affirmative action and how I'm starting to view things more through the lens of more mainstream sort of identity politics regarding especially African American people. So basically, I was that guy who, for a long time, who viewed the struggles of African Americans as sort of a piecemeal, a piecemeal system of historical oppressions and happenings, but I've kind of always rejected this idea that they all needed to be tied together into this systemic thing, and that therefore, if you view it systemically, it'll justify any remedy. And I thought that a lot of the African American intellectuals kind of were more concerned with their own sense of identity and their own sense of personal affirmation than anything that was grounded in real politics. So, like when they would talk about things like microaggressions and I don't feel a certain way and therefore oppression. And I thought there were way too many parallels drawn with like slavery and all sorts of things. And I tended to view it more as a class based approach, view politics more from a class based approach, because it kind of does make sense that if you help the bottom and work your way up, it'll lift, a rising tide lifts all boats. What really shook that viewpoint for me was learning about redlining and the fact that wealth, independent of income, is has been virtually robbed of the African American community because a lot of white wealth today is inherited from real estate, and I don't come from money, so it was strange to me to see a lot of my acquaintances just inherit money. Like somebody would die and all of a sudden they would get a lot of money. That's something that struck me as very odd. And as I get older and more people are inheriting wealth from their parents and grandparents, I'm starting to realize that this is a major mechanism of advancement in our society. Which may to some of you sounds obvious. To me, I didn't realize that so much of wealth was handed down generationally. And if previous African American generations never accumulated that kind of wealth, particularly in real estate, which is where white and mainstream, or I should say non-black Americans get a lot of their money, then then they can't participate in that handing down of wealth. So, okay, you still might say, well, that's unfortunate, but only time can fix these things. Just because you're in an unfortunate situation doesn't mean that that doesn't justify, taking money from others and giving it to you. Unfortunately, you have my empathy, but politically, we still need to focus on class. Okay, maybe. I still wasn't totally convinced though, until I was listening to a podcast called The Glenn Show with Glenn Lowry. Glenn Lowry is a black professor of economics of Chicago University, I believe, and he's a liberal, but a liberal, not a leftist, but he's thoughtful. He's not like a knee jerk, He's a true centrist, and he can justify his reasons. He seems like a good guy. I disagree with him on some things, but he's a good voice. Anyway, he had a guy on named James Foreman, and this guest said, they were talking about is affirmative action, the basically different interventions that have been tried to help the problems in the African American community, and how much of it is based on the culture within the African community. How much of that can be accounted for based on problems within the African American community of the honor culture, crime rates, poverty, how much responsibility do black people have to do the bourgeois thing and just go to school and get a good job and stay married, or is it systemic? They're having this whole debate. And this guy, Foreman, kind of took the conversation aside and said, he said, if I describe to you a population, I think he said in a different country, hypothetically, that was traditionally enslaved, that then was put through a series of apartheid, that weren't allowed to buy real estate, that were put down, lynched, hundreds of years of this oppression, only got their freedom de jure in the 60s, and then today struggled from, high crime rates and ghettoization and all this. If I were to tell you that same story about a different population of people in a different country, would we even be having the debate about whether or not this was due to their historic oppression or their own problems? And that really hit a chord with me, because I realized, like, absolutely not. There's no way. Nobody debates whether the Rohingya, I believe they're called, in Myanmar, or the Fur people in Sudan, or any number of oppressed minorities throughout the world. If nobody has these debates about whether or not they should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and all this, or whether it's because of the obvious oppressions that have been visited upon them. And that kind of sunk in, and I've been thinking about it. And then I started thinking about, Guevara and Lumumba and a lot of my sort of heroes, and how they would view this problem, and that clearly they would be on the side of, repairing the damage done to these communities by the actions of the colonialists and the imperialists and the others. My greatest fear was always that if we got too hung up on the racial aspects of things, that we would never unify as an American people, because I believe in America. I don't believe in the myth of America. When I say I believe in America, I don't mean like I believe everybody can do the American thing and the American dream. I mean, I believe that we must view ourselves as a unified people in order to overthrow the sons of bitches that are basically the bankers, and in order to have any kind of solidarity, the nation state, the community that you live in, has to have some role. And so my fear is always that if we lose our love of this country, or at least of the people in it, if we, hate everything about it and we divide ourselves up by race, we're never going to have any kind of real proletariat reform. It's like, how far would Fidel have gotten if it was like, Viva Cuba Libre, except only this kind of group and this group over here? Well, no, you wave the Cuban flag, you say we're doing this for Cuba, and you fight. Same with any kind of people's revolution. The people in a country have a right to rally around their nation state. Anyway. But I was thinking about how such a movement would deal with the problems in the African American community, and there's no solution that's preferable to just fixing the problem. I don't think massive cash handouts would be the best remedy. I just don't. I mean, it would just probably get burned up like it would if you gave it to any other population of people. I don't know. I'm probably more home ownership, land reforms, all these sorts of things. The great thing about sort of the leftist movement that's going on right now is that myself, as a grew up poor, now I'm still poor, we're all poor, but as a working class white guy, if we were to have our revolutionary moment, politically revolutionary, in the way that would allow us to advance something like affirmative action, that would almost undoubtedly be coupled with things that would help all the people anyway. It is, I hate to use the term because it's so misunderstood by myself first and foremost, but the sort of intersectionality of progress is hopeful. It's a message of hopefulness, I think. You can advocate on behalf, and I do still think class is the number one determinant of political, the lens that is most useful in viewing politics. Even a lot of the measures, a lot of the things that people take issue with regarding the history of African Americans in America, they'll point to class indicators. So they'll say, you can't deny the racism in America because African Americans have such a percent lower income than white Americans, or African Americans own this much less real estate than white Americans, or African Americans, they use classist indicators even to demonstrate their own racial justifications based on the lens of race. So ultimately, it all comes back to class, in my opinion. But there are separate from that struggle, there are certain things that just need to be addressed. And I think that you have to incorporate Black American issues specifically. So that's, to me, to a lot of people, this is just, no duh, I'm way behind a lot of people in this regard, but it took a long time for me to come around and realize that you can't separate, you have to separate, rather, Black issues and address them uniquely. But I don't think it's because all white people are secretly racist. It's just because, which is an exaggeration, but that tends to be sort of the message that I got a lot of times. But I think it's because there's justice, there's a debt that's owed, and so I'm gonna go out of my way to look for Black businesses and patronize them, and see if we can't get some progress going on. All right, well, thanks for listening. If you made it this far, I guess like the video doesn't matter. I'm not, but Bernie would have won. Peace.